Welcome to the Karma School of Business, a podcast about the private equity industry, business best practices, and real-time trends. I'm Sean Mooney, Blue Wave's founder and CEO. In this episode, we have an amazing conversation with Dave Schnadig, co-president with Cortec Group. Enjoy. I'm super excited to be here today with Dave Schnadig. Dave, thanks for joining.
Hey, Sean. Really great to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a really good one. I've been looking forward to it for a long time for a number of reasons that are both going to be kind of, I think, foundational just to the things that we talk about, business and life and all those types of things here, but also some timely things. But before we jump into that, Dave, I always love to get for our listeners here just more of the story of you. So can you give us kind of a bit of your life story, where you grew up, kind of formative experiences, college, first job out of college, and then how you got into private equity?
Sure. I'm not sure you want too much of my life story because I was born very shortly after God was a boy. I'm 60, so I'll try to keep it tight. But I grew up in Chicago, and I think the most important part of that was I was really fortunate enough to have a grandfather who was an entrepreneur and who brought me into his business, which was our family's business, manufacturing furniture. And he was not a carpenter, but he put together back in the early 1950s, actually, a form of leverage buyout. He borrowed a bunch of money from the First National Bank of Chicago, and he bought a very, very small furniture manufacturing company that he became the CEO of. And he built it up over time to become the largest family-owned furniture manufacturer in the U.S., with 5 plants in the U.S. and 1 in Taiwan, which was really interesting to watch as a kid who had an interest in business. And being his eldest grandchild, I actually benefited a ton because I got to go with him to different facilities throughout the U.S. And then he actually brought me over to Taiwan when I was 13 to see how tables were manufactured and the difference of manufacturing in Asia versus the US. So it was sort of way ahead of normal time and foundational for a couple of things for me. One is understanding a lot about how business worked, even when I was pretty young, because it was a natural curiosity of mine. 2, I got to see differences between US and Asian manufacturing, even though I didn't have any idea what either of them were. I just knew they were making stuff in both of these facilities, and that Asian operations were very different than U.S. operations, including back then an awful lot of people relative to machinery. And then number 3, which happened over time as I grew up and eventually sat on my family's business board, I got to see how dysfunctional family companies were. And those were all foundational for what eventually became what we do at Cortec. But I didn't know it at the time. I just knew I was really interested in business, and having this real world exposure was pretty cool. And I worked there in summers as I went through college, and I was exposed to what the sales function was all about and a national sales team and what merchandising meant for furniture business. And then I was also exposed as I got a little bit older as to really what happened in the Chinese disintermediation of the U.S. manufacturing industry, furniture-wise, which was invaluable as well, and again, formative to a lot of what we do at Cortec. So I had that really unusual and incredibly beneficial upbringing dynamic that most people just don't have. And the business ended up actually declining very materially because of the aforementioned just domination of China and U.S. furniture very, very quickly. And we ended up selling that business for a fraction of what it had been worth 6 years before to actually our largest supplier, who was Chinese. And there'll be a lot more on China later today, I'm sure. But that was my upbringing, and that was sort of my formative years. I went to college in between at a little school in Connecticut called Trinity, ostensibly to learn, and then maybe a close second, or not, maybe even a first, was actually to play hockey. And I learned very quickly a couple of things there. That number one, being relatively small and fast is great in high school. But in college, particularly when you're surrounded by guys who play in Connecticut and Massachusetts, there are a lot of guys who are big and fast. And so my competitive advantage dissipated very, very quickly, to the point that I spent my junior year abroad in London. So we'll just assume right there that hockey ended for me. But it was great. I had a great time. I met a lot of people, learned a ton, and came back after college and went to work at a strategy consulting firm that no longer exists, but was in Chicago again for a couple of years, and then went to business school, recognizing that I had sort of a part of the business picture. I had worked in these various functions as a young adult at my family's business, but didn't really understand the whole picture. And I'd never worked in finance before. I'd worked in consulting, got the analytical part that came reasonably well to me, but again, no finance. And so I tried to get a job as a summer associate at this place that used to be an investment bank called Lehman Brothers. And back then it was actually reasonably well respected. And I also tried at places like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. Coming out of Northwestern's business school, which I learned very quickly from these folks was quote unquote a marketing school, not a finance school. But unbelievably, two of the folks that I interviewed with at Lehman took a chance on me and brought me back for a super Saturday where I ended up getting a summer internship surrounded by University of Chicago, Wharton, and Harvard guys, which was only intimidating because they all knew how to use Lotus 123, which is the precursor to Excel. For those listening to this who are old enough to know what the hell I'm talking about. You're laughing, so I think that means you remember it, Sean.
I was a master of the hotkeys on Lotus 123. We switched to Microsoft Excel like at the end of my analyst term, and I was useless.
Lost. Backslash, man, backslash. That was our future. So yeah, you're bringing back very bad memories.
And WordPerfect as well.
WordPerfect. Yeah, and again, backslash. That's the green screens. Yeah, Sean, you are a man new in my generation. Thank you. But in any event, I learned a ton. And I truly amazingly got an offer to come back full time. And maybe it was just because I had a reasonably good sense of humor and I was tireless in my work ethic because I certainly had no aptitude at all. And they gave me an offer to come back. I went back and I worked in M&A for 3.5 years. And I knew I didn't want to be a banker. I always had wanted to be someone who would invest in businesses, but I really just didn't have the balls to be an entrepreneur. I didn't have the guts to start something up from scratch. So this thing called leverage buyouts, which was the precursor brand name of private equity, was there. And in fact, a number of the deals that I worked on while I was at Lehman were leverage buyouts. Some we helped advise on successfully, some we didn't. We had a really, really interesting deal that was the cornerstone of my career, which was with Air Canada buying Continental Airlines out of bankruptcy in 1993. And our partners in the U.S., because a foreign airline can only own 25% of a U.S. carrier, our partners were two guys named Jim Coulter and David Bonderman before they had created TPG. So this in and of itself is a fascinating story that I won't put the listeners through. They were my partners and they were working for Bob Bass, who at the 23rd hour bailed from the deal. And they went out and raised money in a limited partnership construct led by a guy named Eli Broad. Eli Broad was a self-made decabillionaire based in LA who started Kaufman and Broad Home, which is now called KB Home, and then started what became a $10 billion life insurance company called Sun America. And I worked for Eli after this. He hired me, which was also fortunate on my part. And I was building an alternative asset program for Sun America because they needed long-dated assets to match their long-dated liabilities, which an insurance liability, life insurance liability is long-dated. And they hadn't gone much into either private equity or VC. And I was hired to do that as well as M&A. And so in my first year there, we built about a $350 million portfolio, which meant that people wanted to come see us when they were raising funds because we had money. Again, it didn't matter if it was Eli or Dave, it was that we had money. And on the same day that I met KKR in the morning and Henry Kravis and George Roberts, they come off the plane and they're oozing money in their Brioni suits and their Hermes ties. The Cortec guys came in the afternoon and the two cats who showed up looked like they slept in their suits. These were businessmen, and Cortec's operating model before I got there was basically created by two guys who came out of industry and said, we're business people. We can take value and deliver it to the middle market. And there's a much longer Cortex story, not worth going into. But my interest in LBO land really came from my interest in business. And when I met Scott Schaffler, in particular, Cortex founder, his view of how to actually add value to middle market companies resonated with me immediately. I loved my meeting with him. And my meeting with the KKR guys was as expected. They were already very successful. They'd already done Barbarians at the Gate deal, RJR Nabisco. And so I wrote them a letter And about 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I got a call from them asking me to come out for an interview in New York. And so I moved back to New York. And 30 years later, haven't had another job.
Today's episode is brought to you by Blue Wave. Building a business is hard. Top third parties can help you create value with speed and certainty, but it's difficult to know who's best. That's why you need the Business Builders Network. Visit Blue Wave at BLUWAVE.net to learn more and start a project today.
I love it. I mean, it's such a great story. These themes, as I hear, like the really top business builders in the world, it so often starts at such a young age. These kind of foundational, like being exposed to business and wanting to create something more than what was there before. As I was listening to your story, David, so we actually have probably a lot of similar parallels in that I was maybe born in the Midwest. I was born in Cleveland, but then we moved down to Texas, really as part of a family business in the manufacturing space. And during my weekends, it was going to the office with Dad every weekend because he was there. I'm like, all right, I'll go there. And I would play business as a kid and get all the whiteout I could and
Making coffees.
Making coffees and drinking sodas. It was like I could like sneak them out of the kitchen and those type of things. And then as soon as I was old enough, like, oh shit, not listening, we were given jobs in the back of the plant. It was really such a formative experience on many levels, but it was, you see how things are made and you learn to appreciate the person who pushes the broom as much as the person who's in the corner office.
100%. And in fact, I skipped some of my earliest jobs at Schnadig Corporation. And one of my earliest jobs was cleaning ashtrays out of the showroom. And you sit in the prototype shop and you watch these guys build furniture one at a time. It was really, really cool. But yeah, I was the ashtray cleaner. I was very, very good at ashtray cleaning, I was going to say.
My specialty was painting everything safety yellow. And so,
hey, that's good though.
So it was
early OSHA compliance.
Oh, it was great. Like I joke, like to this day, you can still see some yellow paint under my fingernails. But it's those kind of experiences where you get some of the tenacity and the grit, but also the appreciation that these companies are built from literally the ground up, and it's a sequence of everyone doing things that matter.
Absolutely. Look, when I was 15, 16 years old, and the plant I visited that time was in Bryan, Texas, if that name rings a bell.
Yeah, of course.
We went down in summertime, but talk about formative and imprinting when you see what these guys are working in, and there's no AC, and cell manufacturing was becoming a thing. And so I learned a little about that, but I also learned that it was a really good idea to go to college.
Absolutely. My grades started getting a lot better when they put me in a dumpster with a sledgehammer and said, make more room. I was like, uh-oh. I better get in the A's business real quick here.
Yeah, right. Perspective.
And then similarly, like I kind of ended up in the New York world. I went to college in the DC area. And the only reason I ended up going to investment banking is because my roommates were all from northern New Jersey. And they go, hey, what are you guys going to do? And they're like, we're going to do investment banking.
Yeah. What's that?
What's investment banking? And so I got down to a final round. It was between Lehman Brothers and it was Houlihan Lokey's restructuring group.
Yep.
Someone's like, go do the restructuring group because you're going to learn businesses and its worth and learn this thing called cash flow. And I went to that. And then that's a whole nother set of crazy stories in the 90s when things were just kind of a little wilder and just the world was getting so volatile in many ways. And so it was a great education. And so similarly, I really appreciate the background you had because it starts like really at the core of like how stuff is made, how you deliver value. And then the consulting experience, I think, is also a really good background to understand like how systems work and how strategy impacts execution, which it sounds like you got the execution part at age 10.
Well, a little. I think, as I'm sure you remember, like there's only so much you can learn when you're a kid because you don't have any perspective, no context. But the familiarity, that was the thing. And particularly going over to Asia, that was early. I mean, my first visit to mainland China was in 1987. That's very unusual for an American. Yeah.
So pre-WTO.
Yeah, exactly. And I went over there and actually was back in 90. And what's really actually fascinating, and I was talking to my wife about this because we went for pleasure. We'd gone to Hong Kong and just after graduating business school, and we went over to Canton, and there was this area that we were told we must visit, and it was called Shenzhen. And Shenzhen, for those who do any business in China today, understand it's a massive 10 million plus city. In truth, Sean, it was a banner on top of two pillars that said welcome in English with Chinese characters underneath it. Really, really interesting. Welcome to the Shenzhen Economic Development Zone. And it was the first economic development zone that they were building. And behind this big sign gate, it was almost like a gate. What was there was nothing. A field upon a field upon a field. Nothing.
And now it's millions and millions of square feet and people.
But all of it was an idea. And my wife and I took a picture in front of it and laughed. I have the vision of this photo imprinted in my mind, not just because of how strange it was at the time. It was surreal, but because they knew exactly what they were doing.
And they plan 50 years ahead.
Exactly.
The seeds that they were planting in 1987 are kind of growing today.
Yeah, 100%. And they've delivered. And that's why their industrial revolution was 10 years and ours was 50. I mean, the upside of a centrally planned economy is if they decide they're going to do something, they do it.
Yeah, just happens. I did one of the earlier buyouts in China of a heavy-duty truck parts, all these SOEs that we put together. And this was 2001, which was real early even then. And I learned a couple of things. One, in 2001, they had all these brand new airports and brand new planes because they were kind of executing on the plan. And then what we also learned is they had all these brand new pilots. So every flight was an adventure.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But it was just this idea. The CEO we had there, who was a real luminary, like you, was there early. And he goes, everything in China is possible. Nothing's easy. But if you can kind of grit and get it through, like they can make anything happen.
Yep.
And we'll talk more about what has resulted from that in a moment.
Sure.
But maybe before we get there, the other kind of question I ask, and I think I've already learned this question in many ways, but if there were another thing where you say, we'd know you better if we knew this about you, is there anything else? Because we've already learned all sorts of stuff that I never had any inkling on.
I think whether it's me with you on this call or me with my friends or the Cortec companies, I've been consistently accused of being excessively transparent. So most people know everything there is to know about me. I think a little known fact is that I had a full head of hair until I was 42, and I don't know what the hell happened. I am very fortunate to have two kids who are all grown up now and still love me and my wife. And we travel a lot with them, which I'll come back to later. So no, man, I am as straightforward as they come, and I'm a workaholic. So hi, I'm Dave. This is my life, which is Cortec Group.
Hey, as a quick interlude, this is Sean here. Wanted to address one quick question that we regularly get. We often get people who show up at our website, call our account executives, and say, hey, I'm not private equity. Can I still use Blue Wave to get connected with resources? And the short answer is yes. Even though we're mostly and largely used by hundreds of private equity firms, thousands of their portfolio company leaders, every day we get calls from everyday top proactive business leaders at public companies, independent companies, family companies. So absolutely, you can use this as well if you want to use the exact same resources that are trusted and being deployed and perfectly calibrated for your business needs. Give us a call. Visit our website at bluewave.net. Thanks. Back to the episode. So you mentioned just kind of like what it takes to be in PE. And I think it's important for people to appreciate that is it's an all-in kind of game. And to be good at it, it requires that level of commitment to be in support of the portcos that create the value for everyone. It's all in. And so like whenever we have people here join here, we have a pretty intensive moment really just trying to explain the job of our customers, the people on your team, the people elsewhere, and just knowing that this is something that, sure, there are great rewards, but it comes with a trade. And that's a trade of personal life, scarcity of time, a lot of pressure, because at the end of the day, you all have to beat the long-term average of the stock market over a 10-year period for each fund. And that takes a toll. And not that anyone is looking for sympathy, but it's just the reality.
100%. I wish I could say everybody I know in private equity is this way. I believe everybody in my company is this way, but if you're not, you shouldn't be doing it. You should be all in. We preach to ourselves and to our senior leadership teams, you have to be behaving like an owner, like you own it. And they do own it. And we do own it. But if that doesn't come naturally to you, if you don't sweat both the details and the losses 10 times more painfully than you celebrate the wins, then you're in the wrong biz, because we're not going to deliver. You have to live this every day. Otherwise, it gets past you.
You have to have this almost ingrained level of motivation and almost like it, right? And so I would describe to my wife, she's like, gosh, how do you do that? And I go, it's kind of like a sickness. I don't know why, but I have to. And I kind of enjoy it. Now I start like, what's the difference in PE? And you'll appreciate this more than anyone is it's an industry filled with people who are smart enough to really smart, but probably pound for pound, you're going to find smarter people in the quant hedge funds. But what's really different is it's the smart enough combined with tenacity, grit, resilience, and like this inability to not overcome.
You just cannot accept losing.
Yeah. And so I think that's part of it. And so maybe with that in mind, Dave, one of the things that I'm always curious about is some of these things in business or life that you've encountered that were a true challenge and how you overcame that, because I think there's so many lessons in those moments.
Absolutely right. I like to say that every old adage is an old adage because it's been true for a long, long time. We certainly believe strongly that you learn a lot more from your failures than you do from your victories. And we've tried to minimize the number of failures nonetheless, but the learnings are always seared more deeply in your mind anyway, or at least mine. It's a great question. And I've one, I think, that is pretty poignant. And it's actually a failure wrapped within a success, which was then wrapped within a different success. And Cortec over the last little bit has become, in my humble opinion, a little bit too well known for Yeti. Yeti was, without question, our most successful investment. And I know it's one of the most in private equity, but we've actually had a really strong track record without Yeti, as I remind my prospective investors. And one of the things I often say is, if Yeti were only 10 times, would you remove it when you were looking at us as an outlier? And while you're pulling out this 25 plus times return gross for the SEC listening, why don't you take out my two bad deals over the last 25 years too, please? So you can at least be fair while you're cherry picking. But Yeti wasn't a straight line up to the right success. And I think actually, Sean, the hardest thing I've dealt with in business was for exactly that reason. It was because we were doing really, really well and we were growing very, very fast. We made our investment in Yeti in 2012, and it was just a hard cooler business back then. Most people don't know that, but it was a one product company that had basically 11 sizes and two colors. So it was 95% of revenue came from 22 SKUs. So it was a very simple business and a very high risk business because of that. Long story short, we built out a strategic plan with the founders before we closed the deal to be sure they agreed with us on what we saw we needed to do. And it was a combination of a lot of things, including supplier deconcentration, diversification, some customer expansion, moving into the internet, this thing called the internet. In 2012, nobody sold direct to consumer. Yeti was about 40 million in revenues and about 10 in EBITDA when we closed the deal, and they didn't have more than a couple of nickels from the internet. And we also, and I think most importantly, felt we had a diversified product. And so we sat down with the two brothers who were the founders, but also really the creative minds. Roy, the younger brother, actually was the CEO, Roy Cedars. And we sat down and we built out a roadmap and said, listen, we want to move into soft coolers super quick because there was no good soft cooler out there that wouldn't leak or break. And that took about 2 years to develop because we were a plastics products company and moving into cut and sew was tough. And then we wanted to create a product that could put the Yeti brand in the brand acolytes and the enthusiast hands for a lot less than $400 for a cooler. And Roy came up with this idea, which seemed pretty mediocre at the time, which was for a cup, and in fact, two cups. And he used the Slurpee cup as an example, and then a Tervis tumbler as an example. And long story short, you guys know, everybody knows unbelievably that it was beyond a home run. And we didn't even have a top for the cup to begin with. We were competing against insulated water bottles. I estimated it would be a $5 million product line our first year. Roy said, maybe we can make it 10 or 20. But we said, okay, it's a concept. Like, let's put the cup in people's hands. It's almost like a hat, right? They'll be walking around with it. And within about a year and a half, we were pacing at $100 million a year. It was almost as big as the hard cooler business. And then soft coolers came out almost at the same time. And that was a $100 million business. So we were rocking on every possible measure, other than the fact we weren't keeping up with production. We had a tremendous amount of IP that we filed for around each of the cups and the soft coolers, but we knew that cups were more exposed because you can just design it, even though it was a vacuum insulated vessel, you can design them a lot of ways. Hence, that's why they're water bottles. And that's why now there are many, many cups, shapes and sizes that don't look like Yetis. But we were under the Henry Ford model of you can buy our cup in any color you want as long as it's stainless steel and not colored. Initially, that was really smart. And then really quickly, it was really dumb. And what happened was, as the cup demand exploded among consumers, the cup demand exploded among our retailers. But rather than selling D2C, where demand speaks to you instantly, when you're selling through the retail channel, there's a lag. And our retailers, let's say their demand forecasting was limited, and let's say that ours was too, just hypothetically. And so we had this confluence of debacle that happened where they were ordering against a concept that everything would keep growing 100% a year. We were manufacturing against that same concept, but we were trailing it. And all of a sudden, demand of the consumer slowed down because guess what? People started knocking us off. Some of it illegally, and we were prosecuting them. We eventually had very significant 7-figure settlements from some cheaters out there. But a lot of people were doing it legitimately, and the product wasn't as good for a lot of different reasons that we had built into our own IP. It didn't matter. It was cheaper. And so we at Yeti, with our 2 sizes and no color, we had a problem. And it was a huge friggin' problem, Sean, very, very quickly because of this exponential build I was talking about. So I remember very clearly the operations meeting in 2016 where we went through this. And if there's time, I'll talk more about how Cortec interacts with its companies. But we meet every month and we do a full operations meeting, which means we're going through every functional area, much like I actually learned about my family's business. And they don't present, they put together material. Sometimes it's a pretty PowerPoint because that's how the individual leading sales or marketing or supply chain likes to do it. Sometimes it'll just be a Word file. We meet with the CEO and the CFO like every other private equity firm does quarterly, but we instead meet typically with the 8 direct reports of the CEO, and it's the 3 senior people from Cortec. And we actually started using Zoom in 2015. And so we bring our junior people into these same meetings. So we have a 7-person team with every one of our portfolio companies that stays the same from acquisition all the way through exit. And so we came down to Austin, and I'd already had a heads up from our new CEO. That was the other thing. We had transitioned Roy at his own request because the business was too big to a professional CEO, Matt Reinches, who is still the CEO of Yeti. And we hired him out of Danaher. And so Matt's learning the business and immediately has this big pile up on I-95 of cups. We sat there all day. And the first thing I said was, look, we just have to take a deep breath here because yes, this is a crisis and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And part of my recommendation to everybody to take a deep breath included myself, because this was me thinking to myself somewhere in the back, obviously my own ego at play. Dave Schnadig is going to be remembered as the guy who had the best private equity deal, or one of, and blew it, totally blew it, like flaming disaster. And all that ego aside, I didn't want the company to fail. I knew we had something really great, and it was a matter of how do we innovate from this potential conflagration. And so I basically said, listen, we're going to just sit in the room and talk about each of these components, each of the challenges that we have, and we're going to figure out who's going to take which. We're going to attack them, and we're going to fix them. And so the biggest issues we found that we had were lots of stainless steel only inventory at our retailers, lots within our warehouses, and then lots more on order. And so what we did was we stopped all of that was on order. We went and looked at 2 fundamental technology changes that would allow us to add color to cups after they'd already been built, as opposed to inline powder coating. And then secondarily, we looked at inline powder coating. All this was happening over a 1-month period, basically, Sean. It was a nonstop event. And I remember going back to my hotel at about 10 that first night. I ended up staying there for 3 days and working on planning with these guys in execution. I didn't sleep a minute. I was only focused on diving as deep as I could in each one of these vertical areas we were trying to fix, with my knowledge being not nearly as great as expertise that we would find later, but from a construct perspective, helping set it up so that we could execute against it. And then in the morning, after a couple cups of Java, getting together with Matt and talking about who on the SWAT team was going to go execute against it. And long story short, we took back a whole bunch of inventory from the retailers, painted it. And I'll tell you also, I skipped the fact we developed a paint strategy, but painted it and sent it back to them. We took everything that was in our warehouse, we painted it, and then we had this powder coating line. And before we did all that, the strategy that we developed was that we would introduce colors somewhere between 3 and 5 at a time, and they'd have a limited life. We took a little bit of the lesson from Supreme. You create product that would have its own obsolescence. And whether or not it was collectible, that wasn't really our point, but we wanted to ensure there'd be long-term innovation by having a variety of colors. And then we talked a lot about, over time, matching those colors against some of the plastic products we made, having the exact same colorways across product families, which Yeti still does today very effectively. But back then, unbelievably, it took us only a year to work through all of this and resume growth. So we basically were down about 50% that one 12-month period. And then we grew by 100% again off of that. So we were back to where we'd been before within about a 12-month period. And we had retailers who were super happy. We had consumers going crazy. And we actually used it as a tool to drive dramatic growth in direct-to-consumer. So we took what was, without question, the most challenging intellectually, business-wise, and personally, just because of who we are and wanting to win, or at least who I am, and not wanting to be the greatest fool of all time. And we turned it around. So huge challenge, lots of stress, no hair, and it worked, which it doesn't always either.
It's an amazing story you hear about, and it's very in line with what we were just talking about, right? It's just this breaking things down to understand it in a way that just takes work. But then it's just tenacity and grit. Something gets in your way. You don't just curl up into the fetal position and wait it out. You run towards it. You dig below the rock. You go around it. You go above it. You go to the left of it. And then there's going to be another rock. And it's just like, no, we're going to continue to move forward and run towards the challenge versus like shirk in front of it. And so many times people, that's their intuition, is like, let's just wait and see if serendipity will lead us through. Lower the sails. There's a storm here. Let's just...
Right. That's the hope's not a strategy approach, right? Which is, but by the way, there are times you need to just step back. I mean, the tariff situation is one where you had to step back because every day was a different kind of hurricane. But yeah, no, you're right. You can never let the magnitude of the challenge overwhelm you. You have to. You just nailed it so well, Sean. You have to break it into its component parts and knock them down one at a time.
So with that in mind, maybe let's dig into that. And so there's some big stuff going on. What are some of the pieces of advice you're giving to your colleagues, you and your colleagues are giving to your portfolio company now, and around some of the key themes here, and what maybe are those?
Yes, these are interesting times. You were very kind in the way you positioned it. And they didn't need to be. That's the crazy thing. But I'm actually glad you asked, and it's a good follow-on to how we work with our companies. And so I mentioned this monthly meeting. And what we have at our shop is actually a really unique construct, which is unique despite private equity firms always saying what they do is unique. But this construct is totally unique. And so we basically have 3 tracks for our executives. And none of them start at 60, by the way, unlike the operating partner model at lots of PE shops. We start pretty young with most. The youngest is what we call our transaction track. That's the standard private equity model where you're taking really sharp young adults out of investment banking. Probably folks like Sean from Houlihan Lokey back
in the day, yeah.
2-3 years experience. And we really focus, though, while we're hiring people who aren't deal junkies. And there are deal junkies out there. I love a good deal now and again, but I'm not a deal junkie. I'm a business junkie. We want folks who are genuinely attached to business. That's where we focus our time, on those 25-year-olds. And if we hire the right ones, they never even go back to business school, and they don't need it, because what you get exposed to at Cortec from the team perspective is more valuable than that.
It's a real life MBA.
It's the real deal for sure. But it also comes from the other 2 groups that we hire. So The second track that we have is called the business track. It's a really creative name. And what we're doing there is we're hiring folks who are typically, call it 35 to 45, right around 40 on average, who have run multiple businesses. They've been president or CEO of companies that are typically between 100 and 500 million in revenues, but they don't view being CEO of the $5 billion company as the brass ring. These are guys who actually are attracted to the idea of guiding, mentoring, building a multitude of businesses, not having all their eggs in one basket, quite frankly. And while they may have heard of private equity as they were moving up the corporate ladder, they weren't working in private equity typically. So they need that education of what this thing called carried interest is all about. And we explain to those that are interested that by the time you got to be that CEO of a $5 billion company with your big package, you'd already have made that amount of money working at Cortec. So if the combination of mentorship, guidance, multiple companies, multiple executives, not being CEO, but being their partner for real, their teammate, that appeals to you, you'll make plenty of money. Don't worry about it. If it's all about the money, we don't want that person anyway, quite frankly. So that's group 2. And then group 3, which we started in 2020, those 2 groups have been around for almost 30 years since I've been co-leading the firm or leading it. And the last group, which we call our operations excellence group, is actually the one that's most relevant to the tariff situation currently. But we actually, about 6 years ago, began recruiting a guy named Aaron Hildebrand who ran Paul Corporation's operations. Paul Corporation is a division of Danaher. You've probably heard of Danaher, widely recognized as global best executive training ground.
It's one of the world's best private equity firms with perpetual capital.
And it didn't used to be run very well either by the Rails brothers, but they hired really smart people who know business. And Aaron's one of them. So Aaron was 45 when we hired him, and he was running the operating expense side, so everything but the commercial operations of Paul. $3 billion of annual spend, facilities all over the world that were owned, JV, and third party. And he was a Lean Six Sigma black belt in terms of process, but he was the COO of this business. And so he had this incredible training. But when we met him, what we got to know was he was the guy who typically was coming from headquarters to help, right? And when you're from headquarters and you're here to help, most people hate you because they don't trust you. What Aaron was able to do is demonstrate to my partner, Jeff, and myself as we were interviewing him is all the change that he was able to make through buy-in at the local level. We love this guy. So long story short, we bring, typically I mentioned that we have 7-person teams. It's a cross-functional group that works together on the acquisition. We stay with the business from that due diligence phase, assuming we buy it, all the way through exit, same team, unless one of the younger kids goes back to business school. So there's tremendous continuity in terms of knowledge. And what it means is that particular challenges we see in diligence, and we almost always see the fact that even though we buy good-sized companies, our primary business approach is to buy from families or founders. So 90% of the platforms we make are family or founder-owned, about 20, 25 million in EBITDA on average. So good-sized companies, and believe it or not, Sean, they're running off of QuickBooks.
Yeah.
So they got that ERP backbone that you really want to see in a business. One of many fundamental changes we will make, we often see supplier concentration. We often see other shortcomings like we don't have a fully built out HR function. We are going to be investing money in these companies early. They're going to be good performers or we wouldn't be interested in them, but they're going to need that infrastructure to help them take that next growth step. So as part of the supplier diversification process, we're assessing where they make product and who makes it for them and who does well in whatever they make. It's typically a multitude of suppliers, but you may not have redundancy through every product category. You may have country-specific exposure. And in any event, as you might expect, we have several within our portfolio. We've got 15 companies in our portfolio today across funds, and 3 of those have Asia manufacturing exposure that's somewhere between material to 100%. So when the tariff thing hit, what we decided to do was, because I was the chair of the 3 companies with the most exposure, and if it hadn't have been me, it would have been one of my partners. And we had Aaron Hildebrand, who I mentioned, who now is joined by 2 other people. We're building this operations excellence group so that they can provide help to every one of our portfolio companies for all the operating challenges that we have. Aaron and I were the tariff czars because we felt we needed to have a central point of knowledge, given A, the complexity of the issue, B, the differences in our portfolio companies and what they bring in and from where, and C, because things were changing about every minute. The good news is the changes are now happening, weekly? But in any event, that's what we did. And so we became this repository of information. I will tell you today, I know more about tariffs, bonded warehouses, every form of construct of ownership where you look at when the manufacturer is ceding their ownership to you, when you take ownership of the product. Are you the importer of record or not? Are you using DDP construct? Are you first price paid? There is so much complexity around this and how you calculate it. There are many ways to play the game around tariffs, but at the end of the day, we accept the fact we're going to have some exposure and we're not going to do anything to test the law. And so this is about knowledge. And back to your point before, break it down. How do you take that knowledge, specifically apply it to your businesses? And so we basically did a couple different roundtables for our CEOs of the most affected companies, did it together. And then we attacked the individual problems of each company. So we know what we've got. We've definitely reduced the exposure very materially so far. But for the two businesses that we have that are sourcing 100% of their goods from China, you can't successfully buy and sell when the cost of the good is greater than the price that you offer to the consumer. So we're hoping, back to that not being a strategy, but it is right now, that 145% is temporary. And at the same time, we've been working for 2 years in the case of both businesses anyway to move production to different markets, not just in Asia. And by Q1 of next year, one of those two companies will have virtually 100% of its product outside of China. And the other one will have 6 different markets that it can source from because it's more of an open market sourcer. And so the mix over time will change very meaningfully going into 26. But 2025, we're just focusing on mitigating the total cost impact.
I love it. In some ways, as you were saying, this is like some of the lessons learned that I used to take from the Toyota production system, right? It's exactly what you're saying. I love it, where it's just like, let's do a Kaizen event. Let's break it down. Let's get our Pareto together. Let's attack the biggest opportunities, big to small. This is how bizarre I am. I view that kind of way of thinking. It's just like, it's beautiful. It's elegant. It's streamlined. It's like, how do you create something faster with less variability? And when people will come in and ask us what our business is, I go, oh, it's a data factory. And people will go like, what the heck? And they come through and we put it's single piece flow. And even our office is a technology and data business really that's providing these matches for business builders. But it's one piece flow and you just see dashboards the whole walk down. And so I'll walk the hallways here and in a 5-minute walk, I see how the whole business is. But it's just what you're articulating like made my heart sing.
I'm not very good at blowing smoke, but it's very, very clear that you know. And you're running a business that way. That's exactly right. I learned an awful lot over time about lean and about Kaizen, but I never was an expert. I hired an expert. And that expert is delivering that expertise to our companies who don't have the expert either because they're too small. You get it, obviously, and you're practicing it.
It's so good, but it's easy to talk about, hard to do. And so what you're articulating is like, we're going to figure this out. And I think it's a great lesson for really anyone who's listening to this, who's a business builder, and how you solve these big problems that are not only longitudinal, but these really acute things that are going to pop up. So what Dave is talking about, listen carefully, because that's how you do it really, really well. Is like, don't hit the panic button and break it down and then just go after it.
I would say what Dave and Sean are talking about, because you really understand this stuff and you practice it. And I think the other big thing, though, too, man, is you surround yourself with talent. The most important thing has been hiring these folks. I mean, we have these commercial guys who are animals. We've got these operations guys who are animals. And then we wrap it around so that by the time you're 100 years old, like me and my partners are in their 50s, we've seen it all too. And so experience is really, really important in making you a valuable assist to your CEOs and to your business function leaders. And that's really what we try to be, like I was saying before.
Yeah, and you're clearly running the business of private equity, or your business of private equity, like a business. And from what we get to see and from what we're talking about here, what a tremendous resource for your portfolio companies that partner with you to have not only the decades of experience, but also people who are true practitioners in this and say, like, we're pulling this oar with you. Let's go.
Well, and you have cred, right? I mean, the most important thing is when the head of operations, who's probably had a pretty successful career, him or herself, at one of our companies, meets Aaron. And it's sort of like the double A player meeting Babe Ruth or Hank Aaron, right? I mean, he's that good. He's also that mindset, particularly Hank Aaron, very self-effacing, very easy to talk to. And then if you have a question, the answer is immediate. And I've never seen it be wrong. So the credibility, right, of an expert.
Not meaning to uncomfortably flatter you, Dave, but it's not too often that you hear the senior partner of one of the most successful private equity firms in the world becoming the tariff czar.
Oh,
Yeah. No, but it's really important. Like, we're walking the walk, and we're here with you and going to roll up your sleeves, and you don't see it that much.
Yeah, I'll add that to my resume, Sean. That'll be a real keeper. But you know why, right? It's back to what you said at the outset. When you're all in and you own it, you do. And for these three companies that I have ultimate responsibility for, could there be any bigger issue right now? No. If I can't help, if I can't dig in alongside of them and share the pain, even if it means learning an awful lot about stuff that hopefully won't matter that much in another 5 years, it's what you got to do. It's what you got to do.
Yeah. It's the old kind of African proverb in real life. For each of these companies, you might go faster by themselves, but you're going to go a lot further together. And you all are kind of like gang tackling these things with them. So I think that's tremendous. Dave, we covered a lot here. I think is really insightful and candidly very helpful given where we are in the world. And I think a good lesson for the most acute wave that's kind of swept the global economy. And maybe to bring it back full circle to something that's near and dear to people who like to kind of tweak things and love processes. One of the things I always love are like life hacks or just like gizmos or something that makes things a little bit easier or fun during your kind of day-to-day life. I'm curious if you have anything in that genre of kind of insider perspective.
I can promise you that this will not qualify as a life hack, but what I will tell you is it's super appropriate given what we were talking about earlier, our own predispositions and our predecessors in life to spend far too much time working and not enough time doing other stuff. And so it's not a hack, but what it is a diversion that's sort of a hobby. And with that big windup, what it is travel planning. My wife and I have been taking what I'll call adventure trips with our children when they were children up to when they were young adults and now as they are in their mid 20s and late 20s. And the planning of these trips takes a long time. And typically we're booking something a little less than a year out and then planning the year before that to be able to do it. So we've had in the queue many trips, but I've actually gotten much better at delving into the details of the planning with my wife, who works full time, has been a professional her entire career, and has historically been the cornerstone of this. But in the last 5 years, as I've tried to actually prove to myself that I could do something other than work, thinking about these trips, which are typically 2 weeks, and we take them over Christmas time, and they've involved anything from Africa to Antarctica. It is a great diversion for me, Sean. It's the reading, and it's not, ChatGPT isn't where it should be yet in terms of recency and breadth of information. So you really have to scour, even going to, page 7, page 8, page 9 in Google searches for expertise, for opinion. And then actually, I don't want to give away one of my wife's great secrets, but we typically find the 1 or 2 or 3 experts in the particular locale that we're going to by reading. And then we reach out to them directly to help us trip plan, because 2 weeks is never enough. It's like the American mindset of global travel, right? You talk to someone from Europe and you say, yeah, I took a huge trip around Christmas last year. And they say, well, how long were you gone? And you say, oh yeah, it was like 13 days. And they look at you like, you're an idiot.
That's it.
A long trip is like 2 months, man. Wake up. But while we are workaholics and Americans, tough overlay, we plan these trips. And so sometimes when things are just a little heavy, looking at maybe a friend's itinerary, also we collect friends' itineraries, and just thinking and thinking and thinking around these various cities that we want to be sure to see, which you don't know until you read a lot. So it's so highly iterative. And you never plan the perfect trip. That isn't the point. The point is to have a great deal of information to help you plan that trip. And then the journey itself becomes this amazing outgrowth of all the learning that you've done to build it. So far from a life hack, probably becoming a mild obsession, but a great diversion from day to day at the office.
I love it. And in some ways, it's very much the private equity expert way, because you're learning everything about the places you're going.
Right.
You're scouring information, you're synthesizing it. You've got hypotheses. Yeah, you're bringing in consultants. You probably have like a deck by the end of it.
I never thought of it that way. I love it. Great.
We're in the point where it's our kids were getting older, so we're trying to do better trips. It can't just be Florida every year because the kids will be leaving the nest relatively shortly. And I have not been doing that. I go way too late. And then the airfare is a bajillion dollars. And as someone who grew up in private equity, the one thing most of us also really like is a good deal.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm getting all like crazy because the airfare is so expensive. Like my wife's like, chill out, dude. Like, let's just have fun.
Well, it's funny. I mean, we are very fortunate to be compensated well if we do well. And so my vice, if you will, is to put the money back into those trips. And I will tell you, Sean, in all seriousness, it doesn't matter where you go, right? It's spending time with your family, because those experiences, everybody says it, they are priceless, but they are. And you're not going to get them back. But there's nothing that substitutes for it. It's the best.
It's really good advice and wise advice. It's the experiences that you remember, not the stuff you get. And I was having almost like a sentimental moment today because my daughter's graduating high school this year. So last day of school is the day we record this. So we're putting together her high school graduation party, and my wife likes to do these wonderful like picture books, and myself, because I'm a gadget person, I'm gonna do like a slideshow. And so to your point, the ones that I really stuck at is all the trips we went on. And just like, those are the ones where I hit pause and you kind of feel like the emotions well up, and like you can feel a little bit of the wetness in the eye. Okay, a lot, I'll be honest. But your point is like, those things matter, and you're like willing to take the time to invest because you only get to be around these kids so much.
That's right. Well, look, we're blessed. I mean, our guys are both in Chicago right now. And since you're a gadget guy, you probably know the Aura frame.
Oh, yes.
A brand that I'm not affiliated with, so there's no plug. But there's nothing better than when they're not around to just see a pic flash from one of your trips together. And yeah, I was looking at a picture this morning of the four of us standing actually on what was at the time a dormant volcano in New Zealand. And less than a year after our visit to White Island, the volcano exploded and actually killed a bunch of people.
Oh my goodness.
And when we're standing there, and behind us, the steam's coming up and the sulfur's bubbling. But yeah, sure enough. And seeing those pics flash, other than that one, which has a little bit of a macabre component to it, obviously, I always smile. And it's so many of them that we have that it's something different every day, every minute. So yeah, you will not ever regret those times together.
And if you look back on all these great adventures, what would be one of the ones where you say, you know what, for me, I always like to do new things, but there's also things that I like, oh, maybe I'll go back to that place. Is there a place where you say, this might be one of the places that I'd love to do again?
Yeah, it's crazy that you asked that. We've only done different things, though we've done different places in Africa. We've been back to Africa 3 times. I found Africa to be the most impactful emotionally and experientially for me and my family. Went to Japan. We were just in Japan for the first time. Have you been to Japan?
I have not, but I've heard just unbelievable.
Put it on your list, man. We went to go watch the Cubs play the Dodgers. Don't ask, but I mentioned I was from Chicago, so I have at least more than one screw loose from Quartec and the Cubs. And we went ostensibly for that. Our kids met us for that portion of it in Tokyo. I've been to Japan, and I've been all over East Asia. Short story, after 10, 12 days, whatever we were total, I can't wait to go back. I found it fascinating culturally, outstanding food-wise. The transportation system is absolutely mind-blowing and so enviable. I can't wait to go back. It was just one of the most amazing experiences, and there's so many places to see in and around Japan, and it's so different depending on north, south, cities, country. I really want to go explore it. There's not a lot of English in Japan, even today. Tokyo, they're acceptable, Kyoto acceptable, other places we went were acceptable, but the places I'm thinking of going are a little off the track. And yeah, that's on the list.
Just bring the ChatGPT app and it'll translate real time for you.
I will say I did do a lot of Google Translate and butchered the hell out of that language, no doubt.
So I'm going to add that up to the top of the list.
Please do. And when you want to go, hit me, because like I said, that's part of the way you figure out where you want to go.
I need the double secret Dave Schnadig travel guide.
Yeah, it's really my word.
You're going to get a lot of your friends starting to ping you now. You're like, all right, we get your guidebook on Antarctica. But David, this has been really a fun conversation, but also something where I've learned tons of things that I wish I knew before. And so that is really generous because I know time is scarce for you. And so I want to thank you for joining us today and pulling back the curtain on some of the world that you've spent thousands of hours learning to be so good at. So it is appreciative, and want to just thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate your great questions and also your side of the equation. Tons of interesting stuff there and the sharing that you've done. So thank you.
That's all we have for today. Special thanks to Dave for joining. If you'd like to learn more about Dave Schnadig and Cortec, please see the episode notes for links. Please continue to look for the Karma School of Business podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcast. We truly appreciate your support. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, 5-star rate, review, and share. This is a free way to support the show, and it really helps us when you do this, so thank you in advance. In the meantime, if you want to be connected with the world's best-in-class, private equity-grade, professional service providers, independent consultants, interim executives that are perfectly calibrated for your specific need and deployed and trusted by the best business builders in the world, including many hundreds of top PE firms and thousands of their portfolio companies, and you can do the same whether or not you're in the PE world, give us a call or visit our website at bluewave.net. That's BLUWAVE, and we'll support your success. Onward. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals presenting and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any other persons or entities, including those referenced herein. No representations, warranties, financial, legal, tax, or other advice are made herein. Consult your advisors regarding any topics discussed during this episode.